think we've got it. So Dr. Fox, whenever you're ready, you may proceed.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the Rules Committee members. Thanks for the opportunity to testify in support of HJ Res 45, a Congressional Review Act resolution to nullify the Biden administration's unlawful student loan debt transfer scheme. The Biden administration has decided to rule by executive fiat by, quote, canceling, end quote, as much as $20,000 in student debt for borrowers making up to $125,000 per year or $250,000 per year for married couples. According to the Congressional Budget Office, this scheme could cost taxpayers $315 billion over the next decade. The Biden administration used the national emergency status as justification to advance this action, as well as the now 3-year-long repayment pause. The pandemic is over, yet this legal plan remains. During our markup of the CRA resolution, committee Democrats made 2 wildly inaccurate claims that must be addressed. The first is that the Biden administration's debt transfer scheme isn't a bailout. It's a lifeline for Americans impacted by the pandemic. That's patently false. It's a short-sighted bailout. Loan balances would return to $1.6 trillion in just 5.5 years, even if cancellation now is successful. The second claim made was that the CRA resolution is some sort of cruel measure that will leave borrowers on the hook for exorbitant amounts of interest when loan repayments restart. That's false. Nowhere in the CRA resolution does it mandate retroactive or surprise loan payments. It's entirely prospective, and ultimately the implementation of the CRA resolution is the function of the Department of Education. Additionally, we can see from the CBO score, which doesn't include revenue coming into the government from borrowers being billed for back payments, that this is just a false narrative being pushed by the left to scare people. The bottom line is that the student loan program is failing students and taxpayers, but student loan cancellation doesn't make debt go away. It just transfers it to the American taxpayer. The Biden administration's policies do nothing to solve the root causes of student debt or the rising costs of college. As the institution that holds the power of the purse, Congress has the responsibility to protect the interest of taxpayers. Our CRA resolution is a step towards upholding this responsibility, finding lasting solutions for America's student loan program, and restoring the precept of individual responsibility. I urge the members of the committee to support this resolution. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Today I speak in opposition of HJ Res 45. There are many challenges that we have in higher education that demand our attention. For example, students and families face a student debt crisis thanks to the rising cost to attend college and chronic state disinvestment in higher education. In fact, between 2008 and 2018, states spent on average 13% less per student after adjusting for inflation. The buying power of the Pell Grant has also fallen dramatically, from covering nearly 80% of the cost of tuition, room, and board at a public 4-year institution in 1975 to now less than 1/3 of that cost. Students continue to grapple with mental health problems and substance abuse challenges. In Republican-sponsored lawsuits against admissions policies at Harvard and the University of North Carolina are threatening diversity at campuses nationwide. But instead of focusing on those challenges, we're spending time on a proposal similar to the one that has already passed in the Default on America Act. Now, let's be clear. This resolution to eliminate modest student debt relief would hurt tens of millions of student borrowers and their families. 43 million student borrowers across the country are eligible for loan relief under the Biden plan, an average of almost 100,000 students per congressional district. Nearly 26 million borrowers in every congressional district have applied for relief, including 16 million borrowers whose applications have already been approved prior to the litigation that has put a temporary halt to the process. That's about a third of those who are eligible, already approved, and that's for about half of the borrowers. That would erase all of their balance due. Now, H.J. Res 45 seeks to deny all of these borrowers the relief that they were promised and they were counting on. Importantly, the people who would be impacted the most by this resolution are not, quote, wealthy and well-connected, as some from across the aisle have alleged. Under the president's plan, 90% of the relief would go to the borrowers earning less than $75,000 a year. Moreover, H.J. Res 45 would be impossible to implement, creating chaos for both borrowers and servicers. Even if you don't like the student loan relief, it would be impossible to implement this resolution because you can't pick and choose within a Congressional Review Act which parts of the rule you're overturning. You can't line item a CRA. You have to overturn the whole rule, part of which was the pause in payments. Another was the deferral of interest. There's a lot of questions about how that would get implemented, and the answers are not as easy as some have suggested. First, how do you unpause the October through December payments? Also, there's an interest that accrued during those 4 months that borrowers will now owe if you overturn the rule. It's about $233 per month for every month that they did not make a payment. And what happens to credits that participants in public service loan forgiveness program received? Some used those months and have had their loans totally discharged because they'd gotten to their 10 years using those months. We're talking about public servants like firefighters, teachers, police officers, who were promised that they would receive credit for PSLF program during those months. What do you undischarge those loans? And now are they on the hook for additional payments? H.J. Res 45 would trigger a wave of delinquencies and defaults for our most vulnerable borrowers. This bill's impact, intended or not, would create chaos, and it is unnecessarily cruel. And by the way, the chaos created by this has been confirmed by the CRS. Lastly, the resolution prevents executive agencies from issuing, quote, substantially the same, unquote, rule of the disapproved rule. In other words, H.J. Res 45 blocks any future administrative action to support borrowers by pausing payments or interest accrual during future emergencies. Many of our colleagues on the other side have argued that we cannot afford the plan and called it a giveaway. I would point out that at least a dozen members of Congress have received an average of $1 million on PPP loans that were not paid back because they were forgiven. So it's just a matter of priorities. Congressional Republicans were also willing to charge taxpayers $1.9 trillion for a tax package where 80% of the benefits were scheduled to go to the top 1% in corporations. But they're unwilling to invest half that amount to help student borrowers pay for their education. It would be a far better use of our time to focus on proposals that meaningfully support borrowers and make college more affordable for current and future students. Proposals such as the one that Higher Education and Workforce Development Ranking Member Wilson and I introduced earlier this year, the Loan Act, would significantly increase Pell Grants, significantly reduce the interest on student loans, and make college more affordable. The bottom line is that we have a responsibility to strengthen support for those seeking a college degree, not just because everyone should force to get one, but for those who want a college degree, they should have access to that opportunity. Anyone in this country who wants to take advantage of the benefits of a college education, not just the wealthy few, should be able to do so. This proposal does nothing to make higher education more affordable or accessible, so I strongly urge my colleagues to oppose it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The chair thanks both of our witnesses for their testimony. Just, Dr. Fox, just as a as a practical matter right now, is anyone making payments on their loans, or has everyone just stopped?
Everyone has stopped. And that's been going on since, it's 3 years.
So there's no bearing on whether someone is actually completing their college education versus having dropped out. Everyone is not making payments right now.
Correct.
Well, I agree with both of you that we do need to spend some time tackling the rising cost of college. I would also suggest we need to do something to make colleges accountable for delivering on what they're selling people. And if students aren't able to complete the course of instruction, it's hard to see how they're going to be able to pay back in any scenario.
Mr. Chairman, to your comment about we need to do something about the rising cost of college, all this is going to do is make the colleges go up more and more and more, because they'll just assume in the future that that the loans are going to be paid off again, and the students have no incentive not to borrow as much money as they possibly can, whether they need it or don't need it. And we hope to bring forth some legislation in this session of Congress that will do something about that and will make schools accountable. But if we don't stop this illegal payment of loans off, it's just going to make the situation worse, much worse.
And and right now, the college itself doesn't stand to lose anything if
Nothing.
the government pays the loan back, whether the student has graduated or not, whether they got any benefit from the time they spent in college. All of that is just lost in the wash. Is that correct?
Correct. Correct.
So the public health emergency ended. Congress wisely passed a bill, and the president announced the ending of the public health emergency on the 11th of this month. So presumably this extraordinary action is no longer necessary because the public health emergency is over. Is that correct?
Well, presumably, but the administration is not moving forward. Now, they're making an excuse that there is a lawsuit out there with the Supreme Court, but we think that we should take action despite the fact that there's a lawsuit out there. We certainly hope the court's going to rule in our favor, but we don't need to be paying back loans.
Well, I thank you both for bringing the Congressional Review Act to the Rules Committee, and happy to recognize the gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
Thank you so much. Mr. Scott, can you talk a little bit about what would happen if the CRA is overturned and suddenly we have millions of borrowers who are already 8 months in arrears? It sounds as though that's going to create a situation where we could just have a wave of defaults.
Well, if you enact a Congressional Review Act, it's as if the rule was never adopted in the first place. There have been several rules. The one that's the subject of this just covers October to December.
Okay.
So that's what we're talking about. To say that rule never happened means that pause never happened, that interest deferral never happened, and those payments are instantaneously due. So yeah, you're months in arrears because you haven't made those payments. People who have counted those months as they were instructed as part of their public service loan forgiveness, months that they paid and discharged their loan because they had used them to get to the 10 years, now those months don't count. I don't know what you do. Do you unforgive the loan? Who knows? But the reason the pause is still going on, notwithstanding the fact that the emergency is over, is because the litigation is in the Supreme Court. We believe the Supreme Court will say that the rule was legal and that the forgiveness plan was legal. To have people restart paying on a loan that is in the process of being discharged, I think is silly. To gear up, half the people will have their loans totally discharged. And so to have that half paying on loans that the Supreme Court will say they don't owe, and they'll get refunds back on their loan. There's a lot of administration that is unnecessary. As soon as the Supreme Court case is decided, within a few weeks, the payments will begin.
Well, it does just seem like we've got a problem here that by overturning this rule, it'll pitch people into a situation that was even worse than we started with because there's so much uncertainty, because it will put people at risk of default. This is a huge issue for Pennsylvania, where we have a higher percentage of people who have student loans, and on average, they have more student loan debt than most other states. I know over 80,000 people in my district had applied to be eligible for this program, and over 1.2 million in Pennsylvania. So it's a huge concern. It's an area where Congress should be taking action to reduce the cost of college, to up the Pell Grants, to provide better student loan forgiveness criteria, particularly for folks who go into public service positions, and to, not take that action and instead prioritize doing something which is going to cause so much harm is just, once again, a squandered opportunity. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and just yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chairwoman Fox and Ranking Member Scott. I think we need to go back in time, and I always ask my constituents as we talk about the different programs that we have and what they did is remember what it was like, right? Let's remember what it was like when the pandemic hit and our economy was in a free fall. People did not know whether they'd have jobs, whether they'd be able to make rent, or whether they'd be able to make their student debt payments. And we stepped in. We did the right thing. We stepped in, and because we stepped in, the economy is no longer in the same kind of free fall that it was. But the issues around student debt are still very important. And I'm not going to ask again, because I think you highlighted what would happen if the chaos, right, the chaos that would be created if the CRA were passed. And that's something we need to remember. We do not need to create chaos among those who have taken out student debt. And I think that's kind of what you were pointing to. Is that right, Ranking Member Scott?
Exactly. I mean, like I said, there are about an average of about almost 100,000 people in each congressional district that will be eligible for relief. About a third of those had already been approved, ready to go. About half of those, it will discharge the total amount of their loans. And so you've got a lot of people in your district that are counting on this relief that will be very disappointed if this Congressional Review Act resolution passes.
Right. And I think one of the pieces that we don't talk about as often is the PSLF credit, right? The public service workers who received credit for public service between September and December, right? So this is another piece, and these are people there are teachers, there are nurses, there are people we depended on and we continue to depend on. And once again, let's talk about what is the impact on people we care about in our communities. So the other point that strikes me is just like with the Republican tax cuts that led to the ever-increasing debt that we have now, right? Their tax cuts favored the wealthy. If we pass this, it would actually favor the well-off. 90% of the relief would go to borrowers earning below $75,000 a year. If we continued with the relief as set forth, these are for people who are they're teachers, they're people who need the help, right? Less than $75,000 a year. Those are the ones who will benefit if we do this. In New Mexico, it's 60,500 people that are going to benefit from this. Chairwoman Fox, do you know how many people would be denied debt relief in your district?
No, but I do know that only 13% of the people in this country have this debt. 87% do not have debt. And so this is wildly unfair to those people. So if you look at the ranking member said it's about 100,000 per congressional district. Well, then that means 660,000 don't have debt. And so this is totally unfair. Why should 13% of the people in this country, why should 87% of the people in this country pay off the debt of these other people at over $3,500 per person? They either didn't go to college or they went to college and they paid for it themselves. It's totally unfair to transfer the debt from certain people to others. Where are you going to start? Stop doing that. Why is the college debt so significant? How about people who have credit card debt that they had to take out during the pandemic? A lot of people had to take out major credit card debt. So why don't we pay off working people's debt from that?
Well, one of the points, just so you know, 75,900 people in your district would be harmed if we pass this, because they would be denied debt relief. But when we're talking, 75,900.
So you're talking about 700,000 people with no debt having to pay the debt of those deadbeats.
I think that's a very good question, Chairwoman Fox, thinking about how do we deal with wealth, right? And let's look at those 2017 tax cuts. They benefited the most wealthy in our economy. And so that's an example of where we have prioritized, the Republicans, when they were in control, prioritized the most wealthy. And so that did harm the rest of the economy. Chairman, Ranking Member Scott, do you want to address this issue of who benefits?
Yeah, I didn't hear any equity problems when 80% of the benefits of the Trump tax cut went to the top 1%, not 13%, top 1%. I didn't hear any equity.
Because, Mr. Scott, those are the people who are paying the taxes. Those other people aren't paying taxes. You got 47% of the people in this country not paying a dime in taxes.
Whatever the cost,
Ranking Member?
whatever the cost of the per person of the student loan relief, it's twice as much to help that top 1%. I didn't hear any equity problems when at least a dozen members of the House of Representatives got an average $1 million PPP loans that were forgiven. I didn't hear any equity problems with that. This is to help those. And the problem occurred because we have disinvested in education. When I was in college, Pell Grant covered 80% of the cost of college. When these people went to college, Pell Grant covers less than a third. And that's because we have been disinvesting. The Pell Grant hasn't kept up with the cost of education. States haven't done their part. They used to pay 2/3 of the cost of a state college. Now, on average, it's less than 1/3. There's colleges in Virginia where the state spend single-digit percentage of the cost of the college. So, you know, we need to not only do this, we need to look prospectively to make college a lot more affordable.
Right, and we want to be in a place where we are assisting our young folks, whether they want to go into vocational, whether they want to go to community college, whether they want to go to university, realize their ambitions. And the issue is, where are you going to invest? Are you going to invest in that 1%? Are you going to invest in those who took at least an average of $1 million in PPP, but don't want to let a little $10,000 or $20,000 go to students who had debt, who were trying? I mean, I've talked to many of these. They've reached out to me. I've done town halls around this issue, and there are people who are doing important work in our communities and need help. They need the help, and this provided that help. Thank you very much, Ranking Member and Chairwoman, and with that, I yield back.
Chair, thanks, the gentlelady. Gentlelady is back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I guess, Chairwoman Fox, you know, this obviously, you know, we're in the middle of increasing spending. We're doing all, you know, there's lots going. we're trying to cut it, Republicans are trying to cut it, there's been a lot of spending going on. And I'm just kind of curious, you may have said it, but what is this going to cost? You know, what is this going to add to our debt?
Well, this piece alone is expected to cost $315.6 billion. But that's only one part of the loan scam. What they want to do, and several other programs, we believe would cost up to $1 trillion. So the American people would be on the hook for $1 trillion worth of relief to that 13% of the people who have the loans, okay? And the total right now in outstanding loans is 1.6 trillion. So it would wipe out most of it.
Okay, and there's nothing stopping, stopping people from taking out loans today. They're taking them out for summer, they're taking them out for fall semester, they're taking them out today.
I would just about bet you that when we get the information on this fall, we are going to see that loans are up because people are watching what's happening and thinking, I can borrow all I want to. And by the way, in the existing law, a counselor can't tell a student, no, you don't need to borrow all that money. They can borrow a lot of money that they don't need, and if they think somebody else is going to pay it back, some of them will do that.
So in my mind, this does absolutely nothing to address the cost of college, to address this, to address the issue of getting students that need assistance to college. This is simply just paying off loans, paying off, and what happens in 10 years? Do we do it again? Do we do another $1 trillion every, I mean, because this is, we're not.
We're going to be right back here in 5.5 years.
5.5.
5.5 years, we'll be right back here if the trend continues.
So I was being very generous to guess 10, and it is, it just, it confuses me why we are not talking about, I mean, if we want to help people, why are we not talking about the cost, actually dealing with, not just, having legislation that talks about the cost of college, talking about, the structure of those loans, or limiting the cost, limiting the interest, or what. There's so many things that we could be addressing that would actually address the issue, instead of just spending $1 trillion and then in 5 years having to do it all again, when we're not helping those students, those folks with that student loan at all. We're not helping them.
And again, 70% of the people in this country have never gone, they don't have a college degree, and 87 of them, and the others paid back their loans or paid their way, or their parents paid their way. So there's a way to do this. Our colleagues say all the time, oh, if we don't give this money out, people can't go. Well, there are people like I worked my way. Millions of people work their way through school every year, or they save up their money, or their parents work 2 jobs, or it takes 7 years to finish like I did. So this does not stop people from going to college. We have tremendous access, and we have affordable schools. So paying off the debt is not stopping. I mean, not paying off their debt is not going to stop people from going to college.
And I would also argue that maybe people who take out their loans responsibly, and I'm generalizing a little bit, but responsibly, get a degree, get a job, and make a budget.
And most of them pay them back.
All of those people, up until now, who have done that, will now be paying for the 13%. I think we absolutely need to do this. This is one of the things that's it's egregious, because we are just handing out dollars where we should be addressing the issue.
And there's going to be self-attestation on their income. They are not going to have to prove what their income was. There's an income limit, but it's going to be self-attestation.
It just gets better and better, doesn't it? I didn't even realize that, and so it just gets more and more ridiculous that we are just handing out money. So thank you, Chairman Fox, and with that, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. Self-attestation. I guess I didn't realize that. I appreciate you bringing that to the committee's attention,
Well, that,
Dr.
well,
Fox.
Mr. Chairman, that's subject to fraud.
Yeah,
And you've
okay.
got tax,
Yeah, well, believe it when I say
tax
prosecuted.
records.
So
Gentleman
all
from
those
South-
87,000 new IRS agents are going to check that out.
Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Thank you. Appreciate the panelists showing up. You know, this is like this is identical in a way like the penalizing those with good credit reports, paying for those with poor credit reports, paying loans for, across this country for students for money we don't have is the stupidest ideas I've ever heard of. As I mentioned earlier, this administration is doing everything they can to bankrupt this country. Chip mentioned the border crisis we have, the cost, and not one word from a Democratic side of the aisle to express outrage. Ms. Fox, one thing that has not been talked about is the message that's being sent should this pass, should the president get his way. What does this tell to every college all over this country about rates? You are a professor. Does this not just give them the green light to charge whatever they want to charge? Because they're not
Absolutely.
paying the bill.
Absolutely, because they have absolutely no accountability. They can charge as much as they want, and we know that increase in cost in colleges has been higher than the rate of inflation for the past, I can't remember exactly how many years. It's close to 20, though. It keeps going up and up and up. It's even higher than the rate of inflation for medical costs. I mean, rate of inflation and medical costs.
And what message does this send to those who who want to learn a trade, do not want to go to college? To the plumber, to the electrician, to the framing contractor, to the brick mason? What message does this send?
It's that you're going to pay for other people who want to go to college.
Just getting them on the public dole.
Just
and
get on
then
the bill.
further. Do you
Yeah, I
realize-
call this welfare for wealthy people because the majority of the loans that are going to be paid off are for people who went to graduate school.
Okay, well, it's insanity at its height. It really is. It's insane what's happening and the things that are being proposed. I don't want to belabor this. Thank y'all for appearing. I yield back.
Chair, thanks, the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
I thank my colleague from Texas. Representative Scott, you suggested earlier that students are suffering from the rising costs. In what universe will this do anything to lower the cost of education?
It will improve access because they will be able to pay, well, they're in the mess because we haven't kept up with access. Like I said, when.
But how does it lower the cost of tuition? How does it lower the cost of
It
education?
it doesn't lower the cost of education.
It just
the
forgives a
college-
loan.
That's right. Because
which doesn't lower the cost of
and
education.
And you want to note why the cost to the student is so much. When, in the 1970s, the Pell Grant covered 80% of the cost of going to college, and now it's less than a third, and people are still trying to go to college.
Well, stated differently, why is tuition so much higher today than it used to be? On a relative basis to all other goods and services, the cost of education has gone up exponentially relative to the cost of all other goods and services with the exception of healthcare. Why is that?
I don't know why, but it is.
But
And you're telling students.
But there are economic principles at stake. Why is the cost of education exponentially higher today than virtually every other good and service except for healthcare?
Well, you're going to have to ask the college administrators why the cost of college is so high, but the problem that students have is they got to pay it.
Chairwoman Fox, do you have an answer to why you believe the cost of education is so much higher, exponentially higher than all other goods and services?
Well, I think it's because the federal government subsidizes education. Let me give you an example. The more federal aid and generous loan subsidies that we give out, the higher go the prices of tuition. For example, for every $1 increase in student loan subsidies, colleges increase their tuition 60 cents. So we know that the more money you put out there, the more the colleges and universities are going to charge. Increased availability of graduate loans led institutions to increase their cost of attendance dollar for dollar, with no evidence that such loans led to increases in accessibility and enrollment of disadvantaged students. Colleges reduced their own grant aid by as much as 83 cents for every dollar students receive in taxpayer student aid.
Let me ask you another question, Chairwoman Fox. I heard earlier that this is similar to a PPP loan. Now, I take issue with that characterization because whatever one thinks of the CARES Act, I have massive problems with the CARES Act and its $2 trillion of inflation causing spending and paying people not to work and the absolute absurdity of the way it was structured. But let's put that aside for now. You have a CARES Act that included a PPP, which included provisions in it which was designed, somewhat not perfectly, but designed to do what?
To keep people working, to provide goods and services to American people when their government was shutting them down.
So would you agree with me that that is more analogous to a takings under our constitutional jurisprudence and history than it is some sort of policy choice about what you're doing with respect to loan forgiveness or tax policy, right? You have the power of the federal government, the power of state government, the power of local government, shutting down people's livelihoods, entirely shutting them down.
Correct.
So you're a restaurant in Richmond, Virginia, Austin, Texas, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, shut down because Anthony Fauci waved his magic wand and said, must shut down, must wear masks, must do all this stuff because I'm boy genius. Right. And all these people out there working who built up a livelihood, had a business, built it up from scratch, passed it down to their kids. They lose their entire livelihood. The same as if you took a highway and bulldozed it.
Exactly.
Like a taking. So a PPP loan, it was a loan, right, that would be forgiven if certain criteria were met. And what were those criteria to the best of the chairwoman's recollection?
Well, that they kept everybody employed and they stayed open and they did the things that were out there in the loan. Now, in the student loan issue, we are giving to the people who took out this $1 trillion in loans, and we're transferring the debt to somebody else. The people who owe this money willingly took it out to make more money by going to college. Not the same as what the federal government did, as you said, in shutting people down. It was a taking of their business.
So, question there. My wife was the daughter of a single mom, had very little resources. Her mom worked multiple jobs in order to get her through school and to get her to be able to go to the place of going to college. Because her mom didn't go to college, and she wanted that for her daughter as a single mom. And my wife performed very well in school and had the choice to go to schools such as Duke, which cost a lot of money, or some Ivy League options she had that cost a whole lot of money. She chose to go to Texas A&M University. Now, I think that was a good choice for a variety of other reasons that I won't get into at the moment. But she decided to go to Texas A&M, mostly because it was financially more viable and she would take on less debt. Now, my wife, nevertheless, took on about $50-something thousand of debt to get through her undergraduate education on top of having worked 2 jobs through school in order to pay her way through school. She then matriculated and then went to the University of Texas, where we met at law school. She took out student loans at the University of Texas. So at the time of our marriage, she had over $100,000 of loans. Now, she is at the tail end of still paying for those loans. After 20 years, our 20-year law school reunion was last month. So 20 years later, she has sacrificed, drove a 2000 Corolla with no options for years after years after years. Drove, a crappy car while watching all these other people riding around in their fancy car, making tough choices, tough choices about where to live, what to do with her kids, making sacrifices so her kids could go to the school that she thought was appropriate, literally sacrificing. I've sat there with her in tears, dealing with what we have to deal with in a family budget. And she did that. She worked hard. Her brother did that. Now, none of that's getting paid off because she already paid her loans off. I took out some loans. I had to pay my loans off. So my question is, for the 87% of Americans who don't have the student loans in question, for the person who paid off their loans like my wife, for the plumber in San Marcos, Texas, busting his rear end right now and started a business from scratch, didn't take out a loan, what do we tell him? What do we tell my wife? When the federal government comes in and writes a check for $500 billion to say, here's, in the words of my colleague on the other side of the aisle, just a little $10,000 for you, because we're going to write a check with money we don't have, with printed money. What do we tell the person who worked their whole life to pay off those loans? Chairwoman Fox.
Well, some people might say you're a sucker for having done it. That's what they'd say. But you're getting nothing. You're getting nothing. You played by the rules, you did it the right way, and you're getting nothing. Too bad.
Chairman Scott, what would you say to my wife who
You
played
know,
by the rules?
I would say the same thing you would say to somebody that didn't pay off a PPP loan, $1 million. You got people, members of the House, got $1 million to help their businesses.
That is a deft deflection. Why don't you take
that
that up
is-
with the members of the
well,
House who didn't pay the loans that you have an
And-
issue
and
with?
you say the
What
same-
would you say to my wife?
Say the same thing to the.
What do you say to my wife?
80%, to the people who didn't, to the 99% that didn't get benefits.
What do you say to my wife who spent her whole life paying her loan off? Too bad? Too bad? You didn't get the $10,000 check?
Well, I'd say the same thing. It's not perfectly equitable. You're absolutely right.
Perfectly equitable. It's
Okay.
literally a check to 13% of Americans so that some people
Right.
can pat themselves on the back in the false name of compassion while you're destroying the work ethic of the country.
We-
I mean, how is it remotely equitable to take money
No,
and to
wait
go
a
pay
minute.
off a loan?
You have no problem with equity with a tax benefit twice as big going to the top 1% in corporations. No problem with equity at all. No problem with the $1 million PPP
Wait, hold on.
loans.
Make that statement
And
again.
What do you say to?
No,
what
hold
do you
on.
say
Make
to
that
the-
statement
what-
again.
What did you say to the 99% of the people didn't get PPP loans?
The people who got the PPP loans were people who applied for loans to keep businesses afloat, which was the legislation that my Democratic colleagues helped jam through as a part of the CARES Act in a panic over COVID. I wasn't the one that was chomping at the bit to jam the CARES Act
I didn't get a
through.
PPP loan. I didn't get $1 million PPP loan.
Right, but everybody in this freaking building voted to jam that through.
That's right.
Right. And so the PPP loans existed. Why? To try to keep businesses afloat that were getting
No,
shut down by the power of government.
And we had to help people. We had
Right,
unemployment compensation.
but
unemployment
we were
insurance.
trying to keep businesses afloat.
And
yes, it was abused. Shocker of all shocks.
Okay.
A government program of billions of dollars got abused by some people.
everybody's not going to benefit from this proposal. You're right.
But how is it that we can just choose, hey,
We didn't
here's
choose.
a check?
How do you choose on a PPP loan? Everybody didn't get a $1
because
million
you-
PPP loan.
Because you create a policy where you allow people to apply who have businesses who are shut down. That's how. Now, again, not a huge proponent of the entire CARES Act structure.
Right.
We tried to fix PPP
Well, you
on the
don't
back
have any
end.
problem with somebody getting a $1 million PPP loan and not paying it back?
No, I
It was
got a
loan.
huge problem with that. That's why I don't
It
like
was-
government
it-
programs in the first place.
It was
I
a
hate
loan, and you
them.
got a problem with somebody trying to pay off their student debt.
And the chairman, the ranking member, sorry, is making a great case for why we shouldn't have all these programs in the first place that get abused by people
No, they
through
should
the
have been.
abuse of government power.
We wouldn't be in the situation if the programs had been as they had been originally planned.
Wait,
where
more
where
government subsidies
where
for
the
more
Pell
government
Grant
programs.
covered 80% of the benefit of going to a state college.
Does Chairwoman Fox have a, you said
80%.
had something you wanted to add to that?
Now it's the third, and you expect people to be going to college. Now, there's some of us think going to college is a good thing and ought to be available to everybody.
Well, actually, if
I know that's controversial around here.
I've got a thought on that in a second, but would the chairwoman have a thought on this question?
Well, yes, I do. I have two thoughts. Number one, PP loans were a part of legislation,
Right.
as you have pointed out.
Right.
This loan forgiveness has never been voted on by
Of course not.
Congress. This is illegal. The power of the purse belongs to Congress. It does not belong to the president. So that is, the other thing I would say is when there's an argument about Pell Grants, I read the Constitution, and nowhere in the Constitution do I read you're guaranteed a certain amount of money to go to college. In fact, the word education isn't in there at all. But what the Declaration of Independence tells us is we're guaranteed life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Amen.
We're not to have it dumped in our lap.
To the gentlelady's point, I'm going to ask the gentlelady if she remembers this quote. People think the President of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not. He can postpone. He can delay, but he does not have that power. That has to be an act of Congress, end quote. Do you remember who said that?
Nancy Pelosi.
Speaker Pelosi. Do you know what else she said? Quote, suppose your child just decided they, at this time, do not want to go to college, but you're paying taxes to forgive somebody else's obligations. She continued, you may not be happy about that, end quote. Wow. Speaker Pelosi, all of a sudden, a extreme MAGA Republican. How about Representative Pappas, who said, quote, but this announcement by President Biden is no way to make policy and sidesteps Congress and our oversight and fiscal responsibilities. He continued, quote, any plan to address student debt should go through the legislative process, end quote. Another extreme MAGA Republican, or is that a Democrat, Representative Pappas?
That's a Democrat.
And Representative Golden from Maine, quote, this decision by the president is out of touch with what the majority of the American people want from the White House, which is leadership to address the immediate challenges the country is facing. The president should be taking action to reduce inflationary pressures. With this move, he potentially makes them worse. It is out of step with the needs and values of working class Americans, end quote. Again, extreme MAGA Republican, Representative Golden from Maine. Does that sound right? Do you remember these quotes,
Yes, sir.
Chairwoman? You know, one other point here is this question about that everyone should be able to get a college education if they want to. Well, first of all, does the gentlelady agree that you may join ROTC or join the military? I understand they're having some recruiting problems for reasons we could talk about in another hearing, about another topic, about the decisions being made by the brass at the Pentagon. But you could join the military or ROTC and get part or all of your college paid for. Would it surprise the gentlelady that according to a poll conducted by Mission Roll Call, 6,202 veterans, 76% said they disapprove of the push to forgive student loan debt for those who haven't served in the military.
Would
Does
the
that surprise the gentlelady?
Gentleman yield
Surprise.
quickly. This is
gotta
a
vote.
time management question.
Yes.
I'm not trying to cut anybody off, but we're going to finish our last two questioners so you can be dismissed. Otherwise, we'll have to bring the witnesses back.
I will wind up in 2 minutes.
All right.
Well, can we go vote?
We're going to have to recess anyway? You got to recess now, then? Oh, well, then we're going to have to recess now, and then we come back and we can
Okay.
resume.
All right.
I would, committee stands in recess. I'd remind our witnesses, if you could, there's 3 votes. You cast your third vote. If you come back, we'll start as soon as you get back here. Same advice, obviously, the members of the committee. With that, we're in recess. You both have been doing the Lord's work. Now, committee will reconvene to continue consideration of H.R. 467, S.J. Res. 11, and H.J. Res. 45. When we recessed, Mr. Roy was questioning, so the gentleman from Texas is recognized to resume his questions.
I think, Chairman, I know we're on time here, and I said I'd be a couple more minutes. I'll leave it at that. I wanted to just close with what I was saying to the chairwoman about the quotes from the military guys who've been interviewed and said, well, why are we doing this? When I went and sacrificed and did all that I was going to do to put my life on the line for this country and get those benefits. Here's a quote from one Marine Corps veteran in an op-ed from Fox, Cole Lyle, quote, "I joined the Marine Corps 2 weeks out of high school, deployed to Afghanistan, earned my degree using the GI Bill. I know firsthand the sacrifice service members made to earn that benefit. They all made a choice. In most cases, joining the military meant receiving the GI Bill and the chance to go to school for little to no cost. They earned that opportunity." I assume the chairwoman agrees, and I'll leave it at this, agrees that, that is another reason why this is a massive problem, in addition to the final point that were we to actually be successful with this CRA and the president signed it into law, or were we to pass the debt ceiling bill that we've already passed and signed into law, ending this program, that we would save immediately almost $500 billion in 2023 deficit spending. Is that right?
That is correct, and what's going to happen again is if we are not able to stop these programs, the increase in the debt and inflation are going to continue to go up. This is a very inflationary measure in addition to adding to the debt, which we know adds to inflation.
Well, I think the gentlelady, I just want to state again, we would immediately save almost $500 billion in 2023 deficit if we were to pass this CRA and or if we were to pass the debt ceiling bill that Republicans responsibly passed a few weeks ago and the president has ignored. I yield back.
If I could make one more comment. I appreciate your bringing up the GI Bill, that anybody who joins the military can get a free education. But this business of education being unattainable in this country is a straw dog, because most anybody in this country right now can get an education without going into debt. Many are like your wife. They face that decision whether to go to a very expensive school or one that's affordable.
More affordable, right.
Or right now, most states are offering the opportunity to get a free AA degree, AAS degree while still in high school. And many students are doing that, and then others can work their way through college. But access is not an issue in this country. Who pays for the college education can be an issue, but a person can get through college without any debt whatsoever.
I also appreciate that from the gentlelady and would also posit that anybody graduating in high school right now, you're going to do a lot better off if you go get your welding certificate, your plumbing certificate, start a business, and don't go to school and go get a degree in gender studies. I yield back.
Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized for any questions she cares to pose to the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for testifying before us today, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Scott. I'm a parent of a freshman college student with 2 more teens preparing to attend college. I want to express my support of H.J. Res. 45 and urge the committee to pass the bill. I remember as a young adult considering what type of career I might decide and what college degree or what was the best path for me. I've gone through similar conversations with my teens. However, not everybody chooses to go to college. Some choose different career paths that don't require a college degree, and therefore they make a decision to not incur college loans. I'm very concerned that this student loan forgiveness is being extended to people who are certainly capable of paying off their loans independently. It seems to me like it's a giveaway to the rich. I'm greatly concerned with allowing President Biden's intent to spend $315 billion of taxpayer money without any kind of congressional oversight. Over 60% of my constituents chose not to attain a college degree. Yet if this student loan forgiveness and the proposed income-driven repayment plan are not halted, $3,527 from each of my constituents will be used to pay for someone else's financial decisions. A few things I'd like to note. We've discussed about the cost of college going up. I was a witness to that firsthand. I got my master's degree and I sought a student loan. And when I filled out the paperwork, the question was asked, how much does it cost? And the loan came back exactly for that amount. So as we've heard Dr. Fox, if the government is going to pay the check for any amount for every student loan bailout, what will that do to the cost of tuition?
Well, we've talked about this a little bit before. For every dollar increase that the taxpayers give at the federal level, tuition goes up 60 cents. And so all we're doing is encouraging colleges and universities to increase their cost with no accountability for whether the students are in a program that's going to give them a degree, that's going to allow them to pay back their loans. So the colleges and universities have no accountability. They can just continue to raise their costs, and they will, because they've shown that they would in the past.
Thank you. And a few other things to note, not just people that have chosen not to seek a college degree because of cost or other factors, but I paid off my student loan. I worked very hard to do that. We have saved into our children's 529 accounts since they were born. And it wasn't a factor of having a lot of resources to do that. In fact, when I first got married to my husband, he was a law student, and I was the only person making an income. I was making about $27,000 a year as a family case manager for child services. I was pregnant with our first daughter. We saved as much money as we possibly could so that I could take a full 12 weeks of maternity leave. And when I went back to work as the only breadwinner for our family, we had $100 in the bank. We planned it precisely to get us through that. So we saved from the time our kids were born into 529 accounts, and we sacrificed, and that's okay. We're trying to make as responsible of financial decisions as we can. So again, I want to reiterate, this student loan bailout seems to me to be a giveaway to the rich at the expense of those who've made a different choice and find themselves in different circumstances. What does this say to all the Americans who made an informed, different choice to not seek college?
Well, as we said earlier, this says, silly you for having played by the rules, planned carefully, sacrificed for yourself and your family, and paid back your loans.
Yeah. Dr. Fox, I just want to ask, we've heard, and you've touched on this a little bit, but if you could please respond to criticism that we've been hearing from our Democrat colleagues who claim Republicans are somehow being hypocritical because of their support for the PPE loan program that was put in place in response to a government taking following COVID, but not supporting blanket student loan bailouts like the president is proposing. Is this an apples-to-apples comparison?
This is not an apples-to-apples comparison. Number one, the Congress of the United States voted, or members of the Congress voted for the PPP loans. Those loans were given out to help people keep their businesses open, to provide jobs for people, and also to provide necessary goods and services to the American people. So this is not the same at all as people who willingly took out debt to better themselves, to help themselves make more money. That it's a totally different situation. And Congress voted for that. On this, Congress has not voted. This is a unilateral decision by the president, who I believe does not have the right to do that, because only the Congress can appropriate money. And the president is attempting to appropriate taxpayer dollars, I think, illegally.
Thank you, Dr. Fox. I appreciate you leading this charge. Appreciate it very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Gentleman from New York is recognized for any questions he may wish to pose to the panel.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Fox, I mean, clearly we have the Biden administration trying to push forward an irresponsible measure that they claim is a solution to a government-created problem, as you point out. I'd like to just pose to you, instead of using tax dollars for a big bailout for those that chose to take loans versus those that didn't, where should we instead be focused when it comes to reducing the cost of higher education? I mean, it strikes me that we're out there up against the big educational industrial complex that keeps running up the score, running up the price, and the only solution that we've heard so far is more free stuff. So I'm eager to get your take on this.
Well, one of the ways we'd like to do this, and we will be bringing forth later this year reauthorization of the Higher Ed Act. And one of the plans that we have is to have colleges and universities have skin in the game, so that if students graduate and they don't pay back their loans, or even if they don't graduate, if they attend college and they take out loans and they don't pay them back, then we think it's up to the colleges and universities to have some skin in the game on this issue. And to go back to what I said earlier, the more we ask the taxpayers to put in, the higher is going to be the cost of attending colleges and universities. We want to see that increase stop at some point.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Fox. I mean, and I've toured some of the great educational institutions in my district. There are fabulous options for a low-cost education, especially as we're already investing so much of our state and federal dollars from the taxpayers into so many of our state educational institutions. In its opposition to this resolution, the Biden administration stated that our actions here are undercutting the economic recovery of the nation. And as I'm sure we all hear from businesses, farms, and factories all over the country, we have a labor shortage here. And I'm not talking about minimum wage jobs and service jobs. We're seeing good paying jobs that require less education than a 4-year college degree, staying vacant, staying on the books. And it's having an impact on our long-term economic health, our ability to produce and to innovate. And it's having a long-term impact on our communities. This labor shortage and the rush to pursue expensive degrees without true return on investment, this is what is and will be undercutting our economic recovery and continued economic health if we don't move away from the paradigm that every single individual needs to go to college for 4 years and get a liberal arts degree. I support this resolution. Thank you, Dr. Fox and the ranking member, for being here, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank our panel for appearing for us today and certainly for coming back after votes. It's much appreciated. You're excused, and have a good evening.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, after, let's see, we now, I'd like to invite Representative Green to the table as soon as our witnesses leave.